Hey, welcome back to All Things Baseball Podcast. This is episode 22. We had returning guest Matthew Carter. We talked about the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah, that was a good one. I mean,
Awesome.
if you're a baseball fan, if you follow baseball, you have to know about the Black Sox scandal.
Yeah, maybe you heard of like 8 Men Out, the movie.
Right.
So we went over that and just how it all went down.
Yeah, Matthews, I mean, he is our baseball expert. We go to him when we have a question.
Yeah,
He's read dozens of books.
always learn a lot when we're talking to him. So
Absolutely.
with that, let's get into it. Matthew Carter.
Okay, so we're here with Matthew Carter, who's our resident and local baseball expert. Matthew was on a previous podcast, and we know him locally here in Huntsville, Alabama. He's read dozens of books on baseball. He has studied baseball. He has worked at Cooperstown at the Baseball Hall of Fame. And welcome again.
Turn me on, guys. Looking forward to another good episode.
Yeah. We really enjoyed the last episode, and this episode we thought we would dive into. There's some major events in baseball along the years, and one of them that is, of course, a major event, a scandal, however you want to put it, is the Black Sox scandal of 1919. And so we want to delve into this one. Johnny and I were fascinated about it when we were kind of researching it. Just all the characters, how it happened, all that stuff. But first, the thing I wanted to ask you was, is this the biggest scandal or kind of the most impactful thing that's happened in Major League Baseball history?
I would say yes, 100%. This is the biggest scandal in Major League Baseball history. Much bigger than Pete Rose's scandal in the 80s and anything else, or steroids for that matter. This is the biggest one because you have 8 players, on the Chicago White Sox deliberately trying to lose ball games to lose a World Series. That's a big no-no in my book, and then I'm sure in everybody's book as well. You can't any scandals that have happened since then, or even before then. Like if there were some scandals in the 1870s, none of that can compare to the 1919 World Series and throwing the World Series to the Reds. There's nothing that can compare to that.
Right.
Remind us, is that era 1919? Is that like just when you're coming out of the dead ball era to the live ball era?
Yeah, this is probably like the last year, the next to last year of the dead ball era. You're still not. I mean, you're still not really hitting a lot of home runs, with the exception of Babe Ruth, because that's when he really started hitting in 1919. But you still got the dead ball era. You still got pitchers throwing spitballs and other balls that are now illegal. And there's still a lot of small ball going on. So it's still, we're at the end of the dead ball era, but it's still prevalent in 1919.
Right. But baseball's really taken grip in America. Would you say at this point in time it's America's pastime?
Absolutely, yeah. 1919, and baseball was the number one sport. Like there was no professional football then. The NFL didn't come around until the next year, 1920. There was no NBA. You had like boxing and like horse racing as other sports, but none of them could come close to baseball. Baseball was number one by far.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. And so the first thing that stands out to me is tell us about the circumstances that kind of created this storm of how this happened. Like, how did this happen? How do we get to this point where the players are even talking about it?
So the 1919 White Sox were an interesting team. Even though they won the American League pennant and they were a great team, and they also won the 1917 World Series 2 years before that, they weren't harmonious in the clubhouse. There were cliques, some players like, Eddie Collins and Red Faber and Ray Shaw were like, one clique, which were like the good guys, or I guess the Clean Sox, as they would later be called, because they had nothing to do with fixing the series. And then you had another clique which is when we become the Black Sox, which is led by guys like Chick Gandil, who everybody says that he was the one who perpetuated this whole throwing the World Series thing. He was the number one ringleader in all this. And from my understanding, reading up on the World Series, the 1990 World Series, and leading up to it, Gandil just was like near the end of his career, and he just wanted to find a way to make more money and get some more money out of it.
Right.
And so he near the end of the 1919 regular season in September, the White Sox were in Boston. They were going to play the Red Sox, and during that series, like at a hotel, Chick Gandil met up with a Boston gambler named Sport Sullivan, and they knew each other before 1919. Like they go back, I think, reading up, they've known each other since like 1912. And Sport Sullivan was a known gambler in Boston. He always bet on baseball. He's been thrown out of so many. He would be thrown out of so many games, like at Fenway Park or at Braves Field in Boston, just betting on baseball games. And like he would always pay a fine, and he would always be back in the ballpark betting because he just loved to bet. He just loved to gamble on baseball and other things. And there's conflicting stories about what exactly went down. Either Sport Sullivan, like Chick Gandil claimed that Sport Sullivan brought up the idea of fixing the World Series because by then it was looking like the White Sox were going to win the American League pennant if they hadn't clinched already. So they're like, hey, Gandil claimed that Sport Sullivan brought him the idea of fixing the World Series. Like, hey, I can, if you want to fix the World Series and make some more money off this, I think you can do it. And Gandil thought that was a good idea. And of course, Gandil, even though he was part of the Black Sox clique, he still wasn't the most popular. He just was not the most popular White Sox. I mean, he was just not well liked even in his own Black Sox clique. But he was like, hey, I want to do this. This sounds like a good idea. And then somehow he got Eddie Seacott, which is a pitcher for the White Sox, in on it. He was the second person. And Seacott was really like into this idea of doing it. And he didn't really have much of I think his stake was he was thinking about life after baseball. He was thinking about near the end of his career, what's he going to do after baseball? He needed some money because I think he bought a farm or he had a farm in Michigan where he's from, and he's going to pay off the mortgage. Now, if you watch the 8 Men Out movie, there's a scene where Eddie Seacott is talking to White Sox owner Charles Comiskey, and Comiskey supposedly in the movie promised Seacott if he won 30 games in 1919, he would give him like a bonus or some sort of bonus.
I remember that scene.
And yeah, and Seacott that season won 29 games, and he didn't get the bonus. And like in the movie, he's portrayed that like since he didn't get the bonus from Comiskey because he didn't win didn't win 30 games, that he has like a crawl to pick with Comiskey. But I think that was just. From what I've read of, I think that's just Hollywood make believe stuff. I don't think that was actually what happened.
Yeah.
So
they take
but
that. Yeah, I see.
Yeah, to poetic license, But Seacott was just like, you know what, I think that'd be a good idea. He kind of agreed with Gandil, and then somehow Swede Risberg, who was an infielder for the White Sox, I think he played shortstop, and utility player Fred McMullen, they somehow got in on this too early on. And so now you have like 4 of the 8 White Sox in on it. And so they're looking for other people to get in on it. And so Chick Gandil, being the ringleader, is trying to recruit these other people. He goes to pitcher Lefty Williams, and he's like, who also had a great year in 1919. I can't remember his record off the top of my head, but it was him and Seacott were number 1 and 2 in their rotation. And Gandil was like, hey, has anybody told you about maybe fixing the World Series? And he's like, no, nobody's told me about it. And he's like, well, I think it'd be a good idea if you want to get in on this, you may make some money off it.
Right.
And Williams seemed to agree. And then next thing you know, Gandil started talking to Joe Jackson, an outfielder for the Sox, and he was kind of like hemming and hawing about it. But then next thing you know, Jackson's talking to Lefty Williams because they were roommates.
Right.
And, he seemed, from what I've read, Lefty Williams kind of convinced him to like go along with this, or at least come to some of the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And then another outfielder, Happy Felsch, initially didn't want to do it, because him and Charles Comiskey, the owner, actually had a pretty good relationship. He felt that Comiskey treated him great, but
Right.
from what I've read, Phelps was kind of like a happy-go-lucky guy. Like he would just go along with it. He's like, "Yeah, why not?" Like
Right.
he just didn't think about it. He's like, okay, fine, whatever.
Right.
And then they
Now,
got, yeah.
I was just
What
going
were
to
you saying?
say, some of the apologists for Joe Jackson, shoeless Joe Jackson, would say, well, he batted 375 in the World Series, and he really didn't make any errors, or maybe not many. Did he? I don't know. Maybe he didn't
Yeah,
make any, but but he took $5,000, didn't he?
yeah. I think from a good chunk of the players, other than Gandil, got $5,000 from my research. I mean, we can skip ahead, but like they wanted a bunch of money. I think they were promised $100,000 altogether, and they didn't get all of it.
Right.
Or if they did, a good majority of it went to Gandil. Eddie Seacott, when he talked in the initial meetings with the gamblers in before the World Series, he said, "Hey, I want my $10,000 up front. Like, if this is going to happen, you better give me my money."
Right.
And I think later that night, after that meeting, Seacott found a $10,000 underneath his pillow in his bedroom in his hotel.
Wow.
So,
That's
Interesting.
that's interesting. Now, before we go further,
yeah.
I want I want to think about the mindset of the ball players. Okay. Now, out of the
Mhm.
three of us here, Johnny played the most competitive baseball, I would think, from what I understand. And so,
Mhm.
Johnny, imagine going to one of the, like when we went to South Carolina and played in Myrtle Beach and playing that national tournament, or playing for Team Elite, playing in the tournament down in Florida, where you got the most competitive baseball around, and then just triple, quadruple, whatever the pressure is, whatever the obviously the it's a national pastime. Like, could you imagine being a player and actually throwing games? Like, how do you think that, like, what kind of pressure would that be, and why do you think some of the guys who maybe were asked and declined it didn't speak up? Like, what do you think about some of the most competitive situations you've been in, and how would you have felt?
Yeah, I mean, playing at such a smaller scale, it is hard to imagine like on that grand scheme of things. Like it's so many things that are making money that are all like all for bad. I don't know. It's maybe not a great way to describe it, but for me, it would just be like they're just games. Like not a lot of high stakes to them. Where there's the World Series, like there's so much money and there's a lot of influence. So I think when you kind of see that and think like, wow, they probably made a lot of money, but I think in the long run, it really hurt a lot of those players making more money than they could have made.
Well, it's funny you say money, because really, that to me, that's the whole thing. Like, this is why even in today's game, there's so much money. I think money ruins the game in a lot of ways. And here's an example,
Mhm.
almost the opposite of what's going on now, but still bad. Like, today, you've got guys making 765 million and 300 million and 200 million, and they won't run out of ground ball, because if they get a hangnail, they're going to go on the IL for a little while.
Yeah.
And back then, they're making very little money, and Comiskey is holding back incentives and bonuses because of that reserve clause. So maybe,
Mhm.
Matthew, maybe you know expand a little bit more on the players that were the most disgruntled, and why. Like, I know you said the clicks and all that, but why would they be so disgruntled?
I would say just, you know, various ways that Charles Comiskey, the owner of the Sox, they felt that, the players felt that he was kind of cheap. I mean, like there's stories about how he wouldn't pay to wash their uniforms. Like they had, like the players had to pay to wash their uniforms. And like, of course, this is from Ken Burton's baseball. Somebody was talking about it. Like some of the players were called the Black Sox then because they didn't want to. Their uniforms just got dirty. They didn't have the money to wash it. They wanted
Right.
Comiskey and them to wash it. And so eventually I think this is about 1917. They got Comiskey to do it, but then like he would take the money out of out of their paychecks, to laundry mat and to clean it. So I think that some of that, and of course resentment. I think pay wise, their reputation, Comiskey's reputation as being a cheapskate. At times it can be. Some of it's true and some of it's kind of exaggerated, but the fact is, Eddie Collins won the Clean Sox and he was also in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He's making like $15,000 a year, because he was a great player. I mean, even before he was on the White Sox, he was with the Philadelphia A's and he was on their dynasty team in the early 1910s, which, you can make the argument, which I would make the argument in Comiskey was, hey, he earned that $15,000. When some of the other guys are making like less than that, like $5,000, $6,000. I think some of the players, maybe it was Lefty Williams or Sweet Risper or somebody was making like 3,000 or 3,000, 4,000 somewhere in there. So I can see like money wise, it can be disgruntled. And Gandil just feel like Gandil's always had like a chip on his shoulder. From what I've read about him, even before he was with the White Sox, he was just some kind of dude with a chip on his shoulder, just mad at the world, some way or another, and just various reasons of just discontent with their situation on the White Sox. I mean, just depending on the players, it varies.
So these are hard men during hard times, and they get approached to obviously make a year's salary or more, obviously more if they had gotten all their money, and so they decide, that they're going to throw the World Series, and so here we are. So we get a little picture of how we got to this point, but walk us through the series and how the fluctuations, how it changed from, they're throwing it to well, just walk us through it.
All right. So even before the series, I think the day before the series, there were rumors going around that something was up.
Mm.
So among like sports writers, and I think even some of the Cincinnati players got wind of it too. Basically, some of the people who were like some of the gamblers who were associated with the Black Sox scandal were, to an extent, I think one person described their actions as being chatty. Like they were just basically talking about, hey, we're going to do this or something like that. Like, we're going to bet on the Reds and like, against the White Sox. And people were thinking, wait, wait, why are you betting the Reds? Because I thought the White Sox were favorites,
Right.
Like, I think it's like Sleepy Bill Burns and Billy Maharg and I think Abe Attell to an extent were just kind of chatty about that. And so even like I said, even before the series, something was going on. There was rumors going around. And then game one is in Cincinnati at it wasn't called Crosley Field then, it was called Redline Field because Powell Crosley didn't own the team then. Eddie Seacott's the starting pitcher for the White Sox. The first batter he faces is a guy named Maury Rath for the Reds. I think he played second base or middle infield, maybe third base. I don't remember. Anyway, so Seacott hits Maury Rath, I think, on the second pitch thrown in the game.
Right.
And all the Black Sox that were playing as well as the gamblers, they took that as a hint saying, okay, the fix is on.
Right.
So, and Seacott got basically shelled. I mean, he just did not pitch great. He just did not pitch great that game one. I think the Reds won. I think it was 9-1 or something like that. Yeah, it was 9-1. And he just, he lasted. Oh, on Baseball Reference, sorry. He lasted like 3 2/3 innings. He gave up 6 runs, 7 hits. He walked 2, struck out 1, and his ERA that day was like 14.73. It was pretty bad. He had
Right.
Yeah, pitching wise, you could tell that he was just not pitching his best. And so the Reds won 9-1. And then the Reds won the second game against Lefty Williams by a score of 4-2.
Right.
And Williams he actually pitched the whole game. He did probably because he didn't give up as much runs as Seacott, but he walked 6 batters. And you're giving up He only struck out, he walked 6 batters and struck out one guy, and just like, people were just making errors, and the Reds were just coming out top. And so now the Reds are up 2-0 in the series, and people are like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what are the Reds doing?" Because even though the Reds had a better overall record than the White Sox did in 1919, they were still viewed as the underdogs. They still, people still thought the White Sox were going to be the favorites. And even though the rumors were going around, people were betting on the Reds, but people still thought the White Sox were going to be the favorites anyway.
Right.
And then Game 3 rolls around, and you have Dickie Kerr pitching for the White Sox, who was not a part of the Black Sox. He was one of the clean Sox. I think he was a rookie that year too. And he threw a shutout against the Reds, and the White Sox finally won the Game 3, 3-0 in Chicago at Comiskey Park. And then Game 4, Cincinnati wins 2-0. I believe it was against Seacott that game. And then Game 5, the Reds win again 5-0 against Lefty Williams. But somewhere around Game 5, Game 6, I think after Game 5, the White Sox, the Black Sox players were realizing, hey, man, we're not getting all the money that we're promised to be getting.
Right.
We're getting double crossed by the gamblers. That's their view of it. So some of the Black Sox starting at Game 6, try to actually play to win. And so the White Sox won Game 6. Excuse me. The White Sox won Game 6, 5-4 in 10 innings. And then they win Game 7, 4-1. And Eddie Seacott finally got a win in Game 7. And so, an interesting thing about the 1919 World Series, it went 8 games because after World War One tried to recoup some money, Major League Baseball, the powers to be, which at that time was led by a 3-member national commission, said, "Hey, we're going to make the World Series a best of 9 instead of a best of 7 to try to make back some more money because of the war and whatnot." World War One just ended the year before, so they go to Game 8. Right, there's a Game 8, and it's in Chicago at Comiskey Park. Lefty Williams is supposed to pitch, and before the game, he was determined to actually win this thing, but some gamblers intervened before the game. It was like, hey, man, you got to do bad. You got to pitch poorly, otherwise we're going to do some bad things to your family. Like, I think they were going to threaten to, harm his wife if he didn't do it, if he didn't, follow through with the fix.
Mm-hmm.
So Game 8, Lefty Williams, he didn't get out of the first inning. I don't think he recorded a single out, if I recall. Yeah, 4 runs, 4 hits, and he did record an out. So he pitched 1/3 of an inning, and he was, taken out of the game immediately. And the Reds go on to win the game, the World Series, by a score of 10-5. And in this game, Shoeless Joe Jackson actually hit a home run in Game 8, and it was the only home run hit in the World Series by a player on either team.
Oh,
Wow.
So the Reds win the series 5-3, and they actually did. I think the next year, as well as 1921, Major League Baseball also had a best of 9 series. So for like 3 years, they did a best of 9 series, and then after that, they went back to the 7 games.
7 series.
So
now, who was the manager again of the Black Sox, or the Whites? We'll call them the White Sox, just for
the White Sox. The manager, his name was Kid Gleason, and he was a longtime baseball guy. He was a pitcher in the 1890s, early 1900s. He was a pretty good pitcher, not like Hall of Fame, but he was a decent pitcher.
And what is his
role?
Just kind of hard. What is his role in this? Like he had to have known, especially the pitching, as he's a pitcher. He had to have known that something was up. Does history talk about his role, or did he come down on the guys, or did he just turn a blind eye, or was he just dumbfounded? Like what do you read about that?
When I've read about Kid Gleason and all this, at first he was just dumbfounded that his players were playing poorly, and then eventually, as the series went on, even he was hearing the rumors that it may have been fixed, and that people were throwing the games, and he was just like, "Hey, what are we doing?" I think, at least from what I've read in one one meeting in the clubhouse before game 8, he was just kind of laying on. I was like, hey, what are we doing? We got to play better. We can't keep, what the heck are we doing, guys? Just he was just exasperated with this. His team just wasn't doing as good as they were during the regular season.
Right.
So I don't. So I think like everybody else, I think eventually he caught on. He wasn't like naive. I think he caught on to say, hey, I think something's up, but he couldn't prove who was doing what. He was just, but he had suspicions for sure.
And what about Buck's role? What about his? He's the third baseman, right?
Yeah, third baseman. So he was the last. So he was the last member. But the thing is, he didn't. He is claimed that he didn't take any money. He claimed that he wasn't a part of the whole thing. And the way he played, I think he had 11 hits in the series, and he
Okay.
hit like 300, over 300. But the fact is, in at least the two main player meetings, he was there. And so, even though he had claimed throughout the time that he was in on it, and I think the other Black Sox knew that he was in on it. The fact that he was at those meetings and the other Black Sox during like their later testimonies that hey, he was there, he's just
Right.
guilty by association. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's a shame because probably he was threatened himself if he didn't
Mm-hmm.
keep quiet, right? Because you imagine if he's not going along with it, but he knows about it, there must have been some pressure on him that maybe only he knew about, possibly, and whoever was putting the pressure on him. So to me, he's a sympathetic figure, only to the point of he didn't go along with it. He didn't take any money. I mean, Shoeless Joe hit 375, had the only home run, as you said, but he took money. Whereas, what was Buck's last name again? Weaver?
Buck Weaver, yes, Weaver.
Yeah. So Buck Weaver did not take any money and hit well, but guilty by association and marred and barred for life. So fascinating. Who is some? Let's see. So Buck, Shoeless Joe, Lefty, Seacott, Gandil. Who were the other three?
Swede Risberg, the shortstop,
Right.
Fred McMullen, who was a utility player, I think mostly played infield, and then Happy Felsch, who was an outfielder, who in the 8 Men Out movie, Charlie Sheen played Happy Felsch in the 8 Men Out movie. So,
Right.
you know,
Right. Okay.
so those were the
So
8 of the Black
those
Sox.
are the eight. Okay. So we're at Cincinnati wins, and obviously the rumors are spreading wild. But you had mentioned to us that there was a catalyst on kind of what broke this open. I think one of the sports writers. Can you kind of walk us through like how this cracked open to be, investigated, and then a case, and then where it went from there?
Yeah. So during the series, obviously a Chicago sports writer by the name of Hugh Fullerton, I think it was the Chicago Tribune, him and Christy Mathewson, the Hall of Fame pitcher who was covering the series for the New York Times, they during the series they were hearing rumors too, and they kept like a notebook of things that happened during the series that they thought were looked off. And then in the off season of 1919, I think like December 1919, Fullerton writes an article basically saying, "Hey, I think the World Series got fixed. I think something happened in the World Series. I can't prove it, but I think something happened." Like he was the first, in my understanding, the first sports writer to mention that something could have, been the World Series could have been fixed.
Right. Right.
And then Charles Comiskey was like, okay, he pulls out. I think he puts out something in the paper or like makes a statement saying, I will give $10,000 to anybody who gives me information proving that there you have any information that it's going to be fixed.
Right.
And from what I've read, there were two gamblers in the St. Louis area, I think East St. Louis, Illinois, who somehow were betting on the World Series. And I've read it all in this book that I own called The Betrayal, which is by Charles Fountain. It was released, I think, the last decade, and just really more up to date book about the 1919 World Series. So these two St. Louis area gamblers, they come to Comiskey. They go up to Chicago and talk to Comiskey and his lawyer. I think his lawyer was there, Alfred Austrian. They're like, "Hey, man, we got this information. Something was going on. We were betting on this thing, and I think this is happening. We think that this not. We think this was happening. Like, but Comiskey, along with his PR person Harry Gravener or Gravener, I don't really know how you pronounce it. They basically said, "Well, this is just not credible." Like, they didn't believe these two St. Louis gamblers, and they didn't get the $10,000 that Comiskey was offering.
Right.
But next, oh, I'm sorry, what were we going to say?
No, go ahead. I just said, yeah.
Oh yeah. So, but now Comiskey's like, okay, something's going on. Me and Alfred Austrian, the lawyer, we gotta get on top of this, and we gotta try to cover this up as best we can before this gets all public. So they basically Austrian hires like some private investigators to like follow all the players and see if they can get any information out of them. And they got some information, like what I think one of the private investigators. The funny story in the betrayal book, they were talking about how one of the private investigators was following Happy Felsch in his hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he was just like going on this like he went to the wrong house, and like they found out that let Happy move to like a different house on the same street, and they finally met up with them. They did all this other thing. They basically went drinking for a few days. They went ice fishing. They did all this other stuff, and then finally Happy was just kind of like just said some things that were kind of relevant to what happened in the 1919 World Series. Through his, I guess, drunken stupor or whatever.
Right.
So that's the main thing. Was Comiskey and Alfred Austrian were more concerned about protecting the image of their club and themselves.
Right.
So that's why they were kind of like, hey, we gotta. If something did happen, we gotta get on the ball and know about this before any of this breaks out.
Yeah.
Right.
And then in September of 1920, Billy Maharg, one of the conspirators in this one of the gamblers in this whole thing, and a former player, he had 2 brief cup of coffees in major leagues. He goes to some Philadelphia paper and just basically tells his side of the story about the whole thing, and the dam breaks. And now everybody knows, oh my God, that this was fixed. The World Series was fixed, and then now you're like,
he did that. He did that because he was kind of cut out of the money, right?
yeah, him and his friend and former player Sleepy Bill Burns, they tried to get with Arnold Rothstein, the main money man behind all this first. But Rothstein already had an in with Sports Sullivan, and I think Abe Attell as well, who was a former boxer, a former lightweight or featherweight champion. Rothstein was already ahead of the game before Bill Burns and Billy Maharg tried to sell him on it. And Rothstein was basically like, "Get out of my sight!" Like he made a big scene in a restaurant in New York City, with Bill Burns and Billy Maharg. Like, "Get out of my sight! I don't want you here. I want nothing to do with this. I don't." He was making a big scene saying, "Hey, I got to try and make an alibi and say, hey, I have done nothing to do with this World Series thing. This fixing the World Series," when actually he really did through Sports Sullivan. So yeah, I mean. But Harg and Bill Burns were cut out of the money from Rothstein, but they claimed that this whole story, like when I've read it in the betrayal, like Burns and Maharg's role in all this, along with Sports Sullivan and Rothstein and Abe Attell, it's just it all runs together. It can be confusing at times, like who's doing what.
Right.
From my understanding, like they also, along with Sports Sullivan and Attell, as well as I think another guy named Nate Evans or Nat Evans, something like that. Maharg and Burns on their own also met with the players after Sports Sullivan did and said, "Hey, we're going to offer you some money too." But Maharg and and Burns didn't know that Sullivan met with the players before they did. So it was just, it's all confusing how this all goes down. But like they were all of them had some connection to it one way or another. You know.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah, it feels like maybe there needed to be more money put up for anybody else, and they were just they probably didn't want to do that and cut more guys in. That sounds too large of a deal and too many. I mean, eight's still a lot, but I think you can't do the scandal without the eight because too little of players means there's not enough coordination of errors and hitting. Um,
Yeah, and there is a coordination. You're right, Johnny. There's
Yeah.
the game has to be almost choreographed in some ways.
yeah, I'd like to be a fly on the wall, watch at least one of those games, see what it looked like.
I know. I know.
Yeah. Oh man, that would have you know, there is very small footage of the 1919 World Series, but like again, it's not sufficient enough where it's like good play by play where you can like replay it and see. You just can't tell because the technology at the time is not as advanced as it is now.
It
You
was
know.
it was a guy with going in with the hood like into the little thing and rolling the
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
film and just put the film back in. Yeah, that'd be
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So word gets out that this is going on, and it, uh, it starts to leak, and so kind of take us to where they go in for the first trials because word gets out and rumor spreads. Now it's a big kind of thing. Yeah, take us back to that.
Yeah. So September 28th, I think that no, 1920, I think is when the news broke, and Eddie Seacott actually went to Comiskey and Alfred Austrian, I think that day or before that, I think it was that day, basically telling them, hey, they basically confessing, saying, hey, I was a part of this. I helped through the World Series. And so, Alfred Austrian, basically drove Seacott to a grand jury in Chicago so he can do his testimony, his deposition. I couldn't think of the word for it, but deposition. And so next thing you know, I think they get Seacott names Shoeless Joe Jackson, and I think Lefty Williams too. And so Austrian gets both Jackson, I want to say Williams too, but Jackson definitely to do his deposition as well. And Jackson admitted it too. He's like, yeah, that happened. And so, right after, I think the next day, Charles Comiskey suspended all 8 players. Well, okay, 7 this time because Scandal retired after the 1919 season. So he suspended the remaining 7 Black Sox and their careers are basically over. You know, and it sucked. And like Comiskey didn't really want to do it because the White Sox were in the middle of a pennant race in 1920 with the Cleveland Indians, who would win the American League championship in the World Series that year. But he had to do it because the news broke, and he had no choice to do it. He's like, I got to spin these guys, you know. And so the next year that it goes to trial, in Chicago, and everybody's doing their testimonies as well, like getting called up to this witness stand and saying their side of the story. And then somewhere in that year, Seacott's and Jackson's depositions from the year before disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. And I think years later they were found, but like again, in 1921 they just disappeared. And based on that, the grand jury, in the ruling in 1921, found them all not guilty because
Wow.
they felt there wasn't sufficient evidence to indict these guys. So they found all 8 players not guilty, and so they're all celebrating like, yeah, this is awesome. But you know, Major League Baseball has a new ruler in town. The first commissioner of Major League Baseball, the old national commission was gone, and it was replaced by this one man commissioner named Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who was a federal judge, and most people refer to him as Judge Landis. And he said, I don't care. Yeah, he said something like, regardless of what juries say, if you bet on baseball, you're out. You get out. You're not allowed. You're not welcome to Major League Baseball anymore. You can't play Major League Baseball or even minor league baseball for that matter. you're barred. You're banned from life. You're banned from baseball for life.
Right.
So
Yeah, he's an interesting figure, and I was saying this to you last time we spoke about it. He looks the part too. When you see pictures of him, he just looks like this mean judge, like this commissioner, like the Iron Fist ruler, and he
yeah.
play, his face in pictures from the the early part of the century. He plays the part for sure. Um,
Mhm.
so okay, so he's ruled that the guys are out. Guys like Shoeless Joe Jackson, he had played what 10, 11 years. He was he was a little bit more than halfway done with what you would consider to be a normal career, right?
Yes, yeah. He played at least from 1908 to 1920. That's 13 seasons. Maybe not all full seasons, but there were 13 seasons altogether. And
Okay,
so, yeah, he was halfway through his career. I mean, I think he was only 32 when he played his last game in 1920. I mean,
right,
I think he still had some years ahead of him before, this happened.
right.
So, and then
And he
some of
was
these
a
other
sure
guys,
Hall of
they had
Famer.
I'm sorry, what?
And he was a sure Hall of Famer.
He was a sure Hall of Famer. Absolutely. Yeah. And unfortunately, he just threw it all away for what? For some money.
Right,
Yeah, and of course, all these other players. Seacott had a long career too. He started his career like in 1905, 1906, somewhere around there. But the other guys, well, Gandil had a decent long career. But all these other guys like Risberg and Weaver and Happy Felsch and Lefty Williams, they had like shorter careers. They had like I think 5, 6, 7 years, 7 seasons in their careers when this happened. When they got
right.
banned. So I think I think the saddest of the eight Black Sox was Buck Weaver for sure because he always maintained his innocence, and for years afterwards he always tried to apply for reinstatement. And he always kept getting turned down. I think his life out of all the eight was the saddest after he got banned. You know.
Right, right. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a huge black mark on the game, and as I read, and just knowing that era, gambling in sports was not something that was new, but it was more to boxing and fixing horse racing. Baseball had been clean up to that point, correct? I mean, mostly clean, at least in the public's image. From a
Yeah, like
public,
the public image, it's the cleanest sport. Like the I don't want to say holiest, but it was the cleanest sport out of all the other sports like racing, horse racing,
right?
and boxing and whatnot.
So
So
what did
people
this
were
do to the
just
game? Yeah. So what did this do to the game? And obviously it recovered, but what did it do to the game?
well, it left a black mark in the public imagination of the game, and it took. Obviously, Kiss on Matt Landis did his job to clean up the game with barring the eight players and some other players in the 1920s, which that's another story. Um, but Babe Ruth, in the introduction of the live ball and him hitting all those home runs, I mean, that brought the public back, and, obviously Babe Ruth was a great player, but you can say he also saved baseball from just being thrown off the wayside in popularity.
Yeah, he really was. I read a couple of his biographies, and he, obviously larger than life. He had the nickname, lived life large, but also, had a soft spot for kids. He was from an orphanage himself,
Mhm.
so he really captured the imagination. So he really came along in terms of hitting. I think he hit 60 home runs in 20. And
1927.
yeah, 27 was it 60?
Yeah,
Um,
that was when he was 60. Yep.
okay, so he must have hit like 59. I know he hit 50 in the 50s a few times. But anyway, he
Yeah.
comes along and just well needed, right? He just comes along and captures the imagination of America, and we go into the live ball era and all that. So baseball, even though it suffered the black eye, was fortunate to have someone like Babe Ruth, who I think some of the older players resented because he didn't play that type of dead ball era baseball like Ty Cobb did and some of the other guys.
Yeah, and there were some resentment, but eventually they all respected him because he was a great player, and he
Yeah,
also was a great pitcher too. Before he was a great pitcher too before he was a hitter. So, I mean, they got over it.
They did.
you
They
know,
did.
yeah.
So any go
oh,
ahead, Johnny. Did you have something?
I was just gonna say, so the public's eye was changed, and the game kind of gained some of its popularity back, as opposed to the actual Chicago White Sox. Did their perception really change for the better after however long?
the perception of the White Sox are
Yeah, after the Black Sox scandal, I imagine their mark was tainted, but the game itself got better with the introduction of Babe, and a few other franchises kind of not, I wouldn't say glossing over the scandal, but it definitely put that more in the shadows. Um, but the White Sox themselves, they're still the team. And they have to kind of rebuild. So what did it look like for them post scandal? And
so post scandal. They at least win loss wise, it really hit them hard because a good enough, even though those eight players were tainted, they were great. They were good to great players in their own right, and
Right.
they were essential helping them get to the World Series in 1919 as well as 1917.
Right.
So before 1920, from 1901 to 1920, the White Sox were considered to be one of the premier teams in the American League win loss wise. They won the first American League pennant in 1901, and they won the World Series against the Cubs in 1906. And then after 1920, after the Black Sox scandal, win loss wise, it really hit them hard. Like they were just a second division team, which there were only 8 teams in the American League, so like the last 4 teams perennially, and it just broke Comiskey's heart. And he just couldn't. He tried, and like he even had like Eddie Collins as a manager in the 20s
Right.
for the White Sox, and he just couldn't. He just couldn't recapture that magic. They really went downhill, and they didn't get back to being good until 1959 when they won the American League pennant when Bill Veeck was the owner,
Right.
and then they went back to being bad again, and it just like post 1920, it was not a good time to be a White Sox fan. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I
I
would
feel like
say that,
there's
and it's
very
certainly post 2024. It's not a good time to be a
Oh
White
yeah,
Sox.
because they lost more games than the Mets, than 62 Mets.
Yes. I
yeah.
you
Yeah,
know I wasn't alive for the '62 Mets, but I heard all about them when I was growing up. All right, so
yeah.
give us your final thoughts on this scandal, and and what you learned from it, and anything, maybe any other tidbits or facts that you think might be interesting about it.
Well, learning about all the gamblers associated, I think that was the most challenging because, as I said earlier, at times it could be confusing of who's doing what.
Right.
But they all
Everywhere.
played an integral role in the scandal. Um, some of the players, including Weaver and Cyrus Joe and Chick Yandel too, even though they were banned and they couldn't play organized baseball, they played something called outlaw baseball, which were different leagues in like out west, like in Arizona and other places that were not recognized as organized professional leagues. So they kept their baseball players going into the 20s, playing in these outlaw leagues for smaller sums of money than what they were making when they were playing in professional baseball or organized baseball.
Right.
Um, so one thing that doesn't get talked about is like the Reds and the Reds and their side of the story, because even though they won the World Series and all the players maintained that they won it fair and square, obviously, and they felt that they were the better team till their dying days.
Right. Well, yeah.
Um,
Kind of like the Astros felt like they were the best team, even though they cheated recently. Anyway, never mind.
right,
Uh,
and
I mean,
Yeah.
so
so one of the players on the 1919 Reds was a guy named Ed Roush who played outfield, and he's in the Baseball Hall of Fame. His granddaughter back in I think 2006 or sometime in 2000s, wrote a book about him in the 1992 World Series called Red Legs and Black Sox. Ed Roush and the Untold Story of the 1992 World Series,
Mm.
which basically, I mean, it's basically part biography from up to the 1919 World Series, and it does a good job talking about how the Reds players, like everybody else, found out, hey, maybe something's amiss here, And there was a story before Game 8 of the 1919 World Series where uh, Ed Roush got a tip from one of his buddies back in Cincinnati that, hey, maybe one of the Reds players are throwing games too, you
Oh,
know. And so Ed Roush went to his manager for the Reds, Pat Moran, and said, "Hey, man, I'm hearing stuff from my buddy that maybe somebody's going to throw one of the games today. Somebody's probably throwing these games." And
right.
Pat's like, "Whoa, hold up." And so they go to the starting pitcher of the Reds for Game 8, Hod Eller, and Pat's like, "Hey," Pat Moran said to Hod, "Hey, did has anybody offered you any money to throw the World Series?" And Hod said, "Yep." It's
Oh,
like, "Well, what happened?" He said, "Well, the day before I was in my hotel, I finished breakfast and I was going up to my room, and this guy followed me to my room and said, 'Hey, here's like I think it was like $5,000. I can give you $5,000 if you throw today's game.'" And Pat Rand's like, "Well, what'd you say to him?" He said, and Hod said, "If you don't get out of my face, if you get, you better get away from me, or I'm going to punch you in the face."
right.
And he said, Hod Eller said, and Pat Rand said, "Okay, well, you're still starting today, but if I see anything funny, if you're like, getting hit, I'm taking you out." And he said, "Okay." And he pitched a good game. Obviously, they won Game 8, so
Right, right,
that
right.
was interesting tidbit, and it's nice to hear. Like I said, the Reds side of the story, what their players thought just gets overlooked with the White Sox stuff. So it's nice that somebody wrote a book about that, telling the
I,
Red side of the story.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and you would have to think with gamblers that some maybe a different faction of gamblers would have approached the Reds, especially with all the money that was probably going on White Sox after, that stuff goes back and forth. The gamblers obviously to place their bets, and then all the money goes to the Reds, and then obviously other gamblers try to get a hold of that guy, to throw the Reds on the Red side. It's an interesting. I'd like to read both those books that you cited, because I do find it fascinating, and I think it's something. If you're a Major League Baseball fan, you have to at least have to come to terms with that this game is a little, it's not super clean, and there's been some scandals and some controversies over the years. And I want to revisit that at future episodes. Is kind of pick some periods of time in baseball where it's not well, obviously pick some highlights and some fun stuff, um, and then and maybe go back to another controversy. But we can't not mention before we leave the greatest base stealer in the history of baseball, at least numbers wise, and who just passed away, and that's Ricky Henderson. So
Yeah.
um, I'll let you finish it, Matthew. But John, before he goes, Johnny, give me some thoughts when you heard the news about Ricky Henderson, and maybe what you take away from what you've known about Ricky Henderson.
Yeah, it's really sad. It sounded like it was maybe sudden or, um, you know,
He's had a pneumonia, is what I read, but I don't know.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
remember that too. Yeah.
um, just yeah, I think he was still pretty younger,
68, maybe
y-
66,
65.
66. He's going to be
Yeah.
67 on Christmas Day.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So yeah, just it's extremely sad. What a storied career. It is amazing. He got to be around for the last year of the Oakland Coliseum, Ricky Henderson Field, of course. And yeah, I just what an amazing baseball player. Got to play with good bit of teams. Let me see down
Lots of teams.
here. The A's, the Yankees, the Blue Jays, the A's again, the Yankees again, the Padres, the Angels, Mariners, back to the Padres, the Red Sox for a minute, and the Dodgers. And then he coached with the Mets for a year or so. and then just a ton of accolades, Hall of Fame. Yeah, really going to be missed in the game to be around, and definitely have to have people search up Rick Henderson stolen base highlights and all that. So definitely be missed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matthew?
Yeah, I was shocked when I heard the news yesterday, Saturday. I mean, obviously, great player. It's hard to believe. Like, yeah, he was on the '89 A's when they won the World Series, but he was also on the '93 Blue Jays when they won the World Series, and he was on base when Gary Carter hit that home run in Game 6 to win the World Series for the Blue Jays.
Right.
And there's actually you can find the footage on YouTube. But like, I think Ricky was on
That's
first base when or not Gary
Joe
Carter. I'm sorry,
Joe
Joe
Carter.
Carter.
Yep, that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I was Gary. Gary Carter's in the
I
Hall of
had to
Fame.
do a
Ricky's in
quick
the Hall of Fame.
scan of my mind.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
like,
good.
Gary Carter. I think he meant Joe Carter. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for correcting me because even though I am knowledgeable about baseball, I can get names confused too. So we're all
For
human.
sure.
So
For sure.
so when Joe Carter hit the home run into off Mitch Williams to win the '93 World Series for the Blue Jays, I believe Ricky Henderson was on first base. And when Carter hit the home run, you can see there's footage of this on YouTube. Like you can see Ricky Henderson rounding second base with his fist pump in the air, like he knew it was gone. He's like, yes, as he's rounding second to go to
Right.
third to score, and just memories like that, and the way that he would talk in third person,
Yeah.
Yep.
Ricky this, Ricky that. I mean, just great player and just a great character for the game. Yeah.
Really was great character for the game. Harold Reynolds tells a story about how he won the title for stolen bases one season, and Ricky was out before the All Star break, and I guess it
Mhm.
was one of the few seasons that he didn't, play many games. And he said the day after the season ends, and he beats I can't remember who he beat for like he got 60 on the nose, I think, or 61.
Yeah.
He gets a call and he goes, he goes, Harold, it's Ricky. He goes, Ricky Henderson. He said Ricky Henderson would have 60 at the All Star break. This is pathetic. And then hangs up the phone. He said, Harold Reynolds says, he doesn't say hello. He doesn't say congratulations. He's basically like, he goes, this is Ricky Henderson. I'd have 60 at the All Star break. It's pathetic. Boom. And I just find, and then everything I've read about Ricky and just listening to him over the years, total character. But, just, I mean, when you watch Ricky Henderson, and I went to Yankee games in the 80s, you knew you were watching something special. From the snatch catch, he would catch a fly ball and snatch it. And you'd always think the ball's going to fly out of his glove the way he caught a fly ball. So the snatch catch, the steals, getting on base, hitting some home runs, the way he walked, he was intimidating on the base pass. That he just disturbed pitchers like you wouldn't believe. So yeah, he was a special player, and it's sad to see him obviously leave us so early.
Yeah. And Lou Brock was actively cheering for Ricky to break his record because he had the stolen base record before Ricky did.
Right.
And I think I read somewhere because Patrick and we did an episode about Ricky Henderson on our podcast, Baseball History 101. And when we were doing research for it, I remember talking about it before Ricky broke the record. Lou Brock goes up to him, I think in the season before, a few seasons before, he's like, okay, Lou tells Ricky, he's like, okay, how are we going to break this record? How are we going to do it? Because he was just like, Lou Brock was all on board for Ricky to break this record. Like, you would think some people would be like, oh, don't break my record. But it's like, let's do
Right.
it. Break my record. I'm all for
Right.
it.
Funny.
you know?
That's well. Thanks again for coming on. I mean, every
Thank you.
time we talk to you, we learn a lot. We love baseball. Johnny and I do this podcast because we love baseball, and to hear you kind of take us through that scandal and what it meant, the players involved, and and all the characters involved, and then to hear I mean, you read the book on the Red side, which is amazing. That I'm sure there was a lot there too, and we heard some of it. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're looking forward to having you on again. We'll figure out, the right spot, and jump on and just yeah. Thanks for for being on.
You're welcome. Thank you again for having me on. Can't wait to do it again sometime.
Thank you, Matthew.
Hey, thanks for watching and listening. And if you did like the episode, please remember to like and subscribe and comment if you wanted to share something with us.
Don't forget to grab your merch down below in the link tree. We got our hat, our beanies, and our shirts. They're both $20 each. That includes shipping. If you missed out on any holiday gifts and you want to grab some now before the new year ends, make sure to grab those in the description below.
Also, want to mention to you that we partnered with haystacksports.com, spelled just like it sounds. And if you're an athlete or you're a parent of an athlete and you're looking to get recruited, this is a great platform for you. For just $30 a month, using the promo code PVSR15, that's Paul, Victor, Sam, Ralph 15, all capitalized. If you use that at checkout, you get access to 54,000 coaches. So you can upload your videos and all your information, and you will get alerts when the coaches have seen your video or responded to you. And the next nearest competitor is $3,000 a year with a full-time subscription. With haystacksports.com, you can cancel at any time. Check us out.
Thank you. See you next time.